I must say, I've been there. I've been working for William Hague, and there are moments in politics, aren't there, when you can't do anything right. Do you feel a little bit like you're at such a moment?
Well, I don't, Danny. I'm speaking to you today from Wales, where, of course, we just had our joint ever best result in the devolution era. In my own constituency of Torfaen, we had the highest number of votes that we've ever had in a devolved election. So whilst you're absolutely right to identify the mountain we have to climb, we absolutely know that. We're fully aware of that. And the result in Hartlepool was clearly disastrous. We're not hiding from that in any way. But at the same time, we do have to learn around the country from where we did well, like here in Wales, or 11 of the 13 Metro mayoralties are in Labour hands, and those victories in West Yorkshire, west of England, Peterborough and Cambridge. So it is a question now of, our policy review, which Annalisa Dodds is going to be running, and that work is already beginning, making sure that we align our policies to the priorities of the British people moving forward, but also learning from where we have done well, like here in Wales, where we've had a set of policies that really have chimed with the public mood across Wales, and that's why we've won our majority back in the Senedd.
How did those policies in Wales differ from the policies in the rest of the United Kingdom? What was the key selling point that worked there and didn't work elsewhere?
I think that there's two parts to that, Danny. I think first of all, the leadership of Mark Drakeford during the pandemic, his very careful, considered, evidence-based, cautious approach to the pandemic was coming up on the doorsteps when I was not.
They had better leadership, is that what you're saying?
No. I think the two leaderships complement each other on the doorstep. Actually, Mark in power in Wales, and Keir's leadership at Westminster. The second point, and this is what has to fit in to the policy review that Annalisa Dodds is now doing. We came up with policies like, for example, our guarantee for under 25-year-olds of a place in training or indeed a job, really giving hope for the future to our young people. There are policies we can learn from here in Wales that we can now take on to a UK level. And of course, that is what Annalisa Dodds will be doing as she puts that policy programme together.
Well, Ed Miliband, your Shadow Cabinet colleague, said something similar to your other Shadow Cabinet colleague, to Angela Rayner, said that you weren't bold enough. And it's obviously, people always say those kind of things, but I wondered whether you actually shared that view. Are you going to jump on with them and say, to Sir Keir, you're not being bold enough? Well, I didn't get any answer to that, Dom.
Maybe he's still thinking. Maybe he's still thinking quite long and hard. Oh. I think we'll try and get Nick Thomas-Symonds back there.
It's a difficult question, isn't it, for Labour, because they've got to choose between their different audiences. So I think in a minute, when we get Nick Thomas-Symonds back, we'll talk to him about immigration. And that's a typical example. They've got a Liberal audience. They don't want to lose more votes to the Greens. On the other hand, Tom, they've got, I suppose, the Sun audience, which you're very familiar with, which you've appealed to, and you'll know how difficult it is to them. So, Shadow Home Secretary, what we suppose we ought to ask is, you've heard the Home Secretary today. The Conservatives have always been stronger than you on immigration. Is it the right thing for Labour to become as tough as the Tories on immigration, or to try to change the subject? What's your which way are you going to go on that?
Sorry, Danny, I've just had a couple of connection issues there. I think the question you were asking me about Keir being bolder, I hope you caught my answer to that.
No, we didn't actually. So why don't you go ahead?
Perhaps I could just deal with that, because clearly we will set out that radical, credible, bolder offer. But the point I was making was that, first of all, we've been in the position of an opposition during the pandemic, in that, of course, we've supported the government's right to do so. And I think that's been in the national interest. It wouldn't have been helpful, for example, if we hadn't backed the public health messaging and tried to mix it. I think we were right to back things like the furlough scheme. We've also held the government to account as well. Keir Starmer still hasn't had that opportunity to actually speak to a room of people. So that's that connection with the public that will come. So I think absolutely Keir will be being bolder over the next few months.
Let me just ask you about one particular example of boldness, because it's been a difficult issue. You know, Ed Miliband was one of the people I named. It was a difficult issue for him. Do you think you should try to match the Tory toughness on immigration, at least in terms of Tory rhetoric on immigration, go after the votes that are attracted by that? Or do you think should be appealing to a new Liberal audience who might otherwise be attracted to the Green Party, for example, and be for more open immigration? What is the stance that you advise your party to take?
Well, I don't accept that dichotomy in the question, Danny, because I think that there is a coalition to be built out there for an immigration policy that is both competent and indeed compassionate. I genuinely believe that's the case, and that's what I found on the doorsteps. I think that there is a desire both to absolutely secure our borders, and I've been making that argument throughout the pandemic, but at the same time to continue what is a great British tradition, actually, of offering sanctuaries to some of the most vulnerable people around the world. Like, let me give the example of the DUB scheme, which you'll be familiar, where in Parliament we thought we had agreement from the government that they would take 3,000 unaccompanied children who are some of the most vulnerable people on earth. Yet the government closed that scheme down, having taken only 300. And that's a very good example of where I think there is a coalition to be built out there for a humane immigration policy that works in the national interest.
Let me give an example that hit the news recently, and that was the immigration arrests in Glasgow. The Home Secretary says, look, these were illegal immigrants. The police have got to do their job. But on the Liberal left, there was some concern about it. Was it bad timing because of Eid? Was it appropriate to arrest people in this way? Where were you on that? Do you agree with the Home Secretary, or do you agree with the left critics?
Well, no, my view on this is, firstly, as a principle, people who have no right to remain in the United Kingdom should be removed. I think that's absolutely clear. The two issues I have with what happened in Glasgow are, firstly, that I am not persuaded that there's been appropriate due process in this case. I have real worries, for example, about the Home Office record on asylum appeals. They lose 55% of cases on appeal, and I'm not au fait enough with the detail to know that there has been sufficient due process in that particular case. But secondly, even if there had been that due process, clearly there then has to be enforcement. But I'm not convinced that these dawn raids, these dramatic dawn raids, are the way to build consensus for immigration enforcement and to gain confidence of the local community, because that clearly wasn't the case in Glasgow.
If you'd been living on that street, would you have joined in the protest?
I mean, it's difficult for me to answer that question directly because I wasn't there in the particular situation. But I think what we have to have here are the two principles. We will absolutely remove people who have no right to be here. That would be the approach a Labour government would take. But it is about due process, and it's about finding a means of enforcement that doesn't involve the dramatic dawn raids that clearly aren't commanding confidence of the community.
Let me take another issue on which there's a sort of populist instinct and I suppose a liberal instinct, and that is the BBC. You'll have heard the Home Secretary, or maybe you haven't, but the Home Secretary was asking some questions about the relevance of the BBC in the light of what had happened with Martin Bashir. Do you think this is an isolated incident, or does it question the relevance of the BBC? Do you think there might be more that needs to be done about the place of the BBC as a national broadcaster?
Well, look, I don't think we should have a knee-jerk reaction to this, but it's extraordinarily serious. Let's be clear about this, that in 1996, that iconic interview with Princess Diana, which we all remember, that was obtained by deception, is clearly extraordinarily serious. What I think should happen is we need answers to questions. I think, firstly, can the BBC show us that such a thing wouldn't happen again? Now, the governance structure, Danny, as you know, has changed. It was the Board of Governors in those days, and that was regarded as being too close to the management, so that structure was changed. But can we know that sort of thing wouldn't happen again now? And secondly, why was Mr. Bashir re-employed in 2016, given what the BBC knew? So I think the BBC has some very searching questions to answer, and now needs to make clear that it's going to rebuild trust with the public by showing that something like that can't happen again.
What would a Labour government do if they couldn't show you that?
Well, I think that you would clearly then need to look at things like the governance structure. You need to look at modes of accountability. But I think the immediate priority is to say to the BBC that they have to come up with answers to those questions, and do that pretty quickly, because the BBC, let's remember that a public service broadcaster, at a time of the fake news, the misinformation online, a public service broadcaster is very important. And the BBC still has a great reputation, particularly around the world, and has a number of excellent, really well-respected programmes. So it's for the BBC now to look at this incident, the impact it's had, including on Princes William and Harry, who've spoken about it so movingly, and to show that it is worthy of our trust and that that couldn't happen again.
Okay, one final thing. The Batley and Spen by-election is a difficult political moment for the Labour Party. If you don't win the Batley and Spen by-election, do you think that casts a question over whether Keir Starmer can continue as leader?
No, I don't think that it casts a shadow. I think Keir Starmer is the person to lead the Labour Party. I've seen Keir as lawyer and as politician, that deep burning sense he's got to tackle injustice and inequality, and I'm looking forward to seeing him set that out to the public. But in terms of the Batley and Spen by-election, I'm not underestimating the difficulty of it. UK government clearly having a vaccine bounce, if you like, but we can win. We'll be doing our very best to win. We're selecting our candidate today, in fact. Look forward to that candidate being selected, and very much looking forward to going up there, knocking the doors in Batley and Spen.